Hello again and welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at present participles. These are verbal adjectives with present aspect. A participle, if you remember, is a verbal adjective. That means it's allowing a whole clause to tell us more about some word in the main clause. Present participles use present aspect. And again, if you remember, this views the action as either continuous, or repeated or habitual, or beginning, or as timeless, like in a proverb. If you remember the metaphor of the train, this is like standing right up close to the train and either seeing it approach or seeing the cars whipping past. The form of a present participle is very much like second aorist participles. The main difference is in the stem that's used. So present participles will use the present stem, whereas second aorist participles will use the second aorist stem. Here are the parts of a present active participle, and this should be fairly familiar to you if you remember the parts of an aorist participle. Here we don't have an augment, not just because we're in the present tense, but also because we're outside the indicative mood. We have our present stem, lu, from luo. With the present, we have no tense marker, and the connecting vowel is an omicron. So both of those features, again, resemble the second aorist participles. The voice indicator, as always, is nun tau for the active, at least in the masculine and neuter. And the case ending, we use the regular third declension case endings for masculine and neuter, and first declension for feminine. So we get the completed form, masculine genitive singular, luontos. We can, again, compare the parts of different kinds of participles here. With the second aorist active, we had the second aorist stem, ape, no tense marker, and an omicron connecting vowel, and then nun tau voice indicator and the third declension or first declension case ending. The first aorist active participle, if you remember, was very much the same. The only two differences were that now we have a sigma tense marker and an alpha connecting vowel in place of the omicron connecting vowel of the second aorist. And you can see here again how much the present active participle resembles the second aorist active participle. The only difference being the stem that's used, the present stem instead of the second aorist stem. Let's look at how these forms work out for a singular example, luo. And again, the point with these charts isn't to memorize every single word on the chart. It's to show us the patterns of forming these participles. So the first thing we want to notice is where the irregular endings are going to be. And in present active participles, just like in aorist active participles, the masculine nominative and vocative is irregular, and the neuter, nominative, accusative, and vocative is irregular. And again, the accusative is included there with the neuter because the neuter singular always uses the same form for nominative, accusative, and vocative. So the ending that gets added onto the lu stem in the masculine nominative singular is own, and that's going to be a very familiar ending very quickly. And in the neuter, we still have the connecting vowel, omicron, but we just have the nu ending. So luon is the masculine nominative singular, and luon is the neuter nominative singular. And then those forms are repeated in the vocative, and for the neuter in the accusative as well. But let's look at the things that are quite regular. So we have the omicron connecting vowel, plus in the masculine and neuter, the nun tau voice indicator of the active. And in the feminine, we have the us combination of the connecting vowel and the s voice indicator. We then add on our regular noun endings. So in the masculine and neuter, these are third declension endings. We have the irregular luon in the masculine nominative singular, but then luon tas, dative luon ti, accusative luon ta, just like third declension nouns. And the vocative again is the irregular luon. With the neuter, the only two forms where we see the regular third declension noun endings show up are the genitive and dative singular. But again, we have luon tas and luon ti. In the feminine, we have that luus form with the stem and the connecting vowel and the voice indicator all together, luus, and then we add first declension feminine endings, luusa, but then since the last letter there is a sigma, we're going to flip back to eta, and the rest of the endings are luuses in the genitive, luuse in the dative, luusein in the accusative, and luusa in the vocative, because the vocative is the same as the nominative. Now let's look at a plural example, a present active plural participle. As we can see, these are even more regular than with the singular. We don't have the sort of irregular endings that we saw in the singular. So we have almost across the board just the omicron connecting vowel plus the regular voice indicator. So that gives us ont in the masculine and neuter, and us in the feminine, because the omicron connecting vowel combines with the epsilon of the S feminine voice indicator, feminine active voice indicator, and omicron and epsilon, when they combine, become u. So ont in the masculine and neuter, and us in the feminine. The two places where we have some irregularity here are in the dative plurals of the masculine and neuter. This is because the normal third declension ending for the dative plural is C, sigma iota, and if we combine that with the regular voice indicator, nun tau, we would get ont C. But that's difficult to pronounce. So the tau drops out, which would leave us with on C, and that very quickly seems to have been corrupted to uc. So if it helps, you can remember that the nu kind of looks a lot like an upsilon. An upsilon is just a rounded off version of a nu. So once you drop out the tau for pronunciation's sake, and in regular use, the sharp point on the nun gets the nu gets rubbed off the bottom, and you get an upsilon. So we have luusi in the dative masculine plural and the dative neuter plural. But aside from that, these connecting vowels and tense indicators are all totally regular. And in the endings, we have a completely regular set of third declension plural endings for the masculine and neuter, and first declension plural endings for the feminine. What about middle passive participles in the present? Well, here again are the parts of a present middle passive participle. No augment still, because these are participles. We have the lu stem, no tense marker, the omicron connecting vowel, and really the only difference between the present active and present middle passive is the voice indicator. So now instead of nun tau, or S for the feminine, we're going to use men for all genders, and then add on a case ending. And I've got the genitive here to remind us that when we move to the middle or passive, instead of using third declension endings for the masculine and neuter, we shift to second declension endings after men. Again, let's compare our components of middle participles. The second aorist middle, use the second aorist stem, no augment again, no tense marker because this is second aorist, and the omicron connecting vowel before men and then the second or first declension noun ending. The first aorist middle had the typical differences from that. Sigma tense marker appears, the alpha connecting vowel is substituted for the omicron connecting vowel, but the men middle voice indicator is still there, and the second or first declension noun ending. And in comparison, once more, we can see that the components for the present middle passive participle are really almost identical to those for the second aorist middle participle. No tense marker, omicron connecting vowel, men voice indicator, and second or first declension case endings. The only difference, once again, is that we're using the present tense stem, lu, instead of a second aorist stem like ape. Here we find a very highly regular set of forms. All across the board in the singular, we have the omicron connecting vowel with the men middle passive voice indicator. So omen is what we put on the end of the stem for every one of these singular forms. And then after that, we just add our regular noun case endings. The one thing to remember, again, is that in the middle passive, we're going to use second declension endings for the masculine and neuter instead of third declension endings. So we're going to have luomenos, luomenu, luomeno, luomenon, and luomene in the masculine, for example. And in the feminine, because the voice indicator now doesn't end with a sigma, instead of an alpha ending in the nominative, it's just a regular eta ending. But we have regular first declension endings, luomene, luomenes, luomene, luomenane, and luomene. And the neuter singular is similarly quite regular. If we turn to the plural, we have the same regular connecting vowel and voice indicator, and the same totally regular case endings. Now the plural of the second declension case endings for masculine and neuter, and the plural's first declension case endings for the feminine. So how do we go about parsing a participle? If we see something and we recognize, hey, I think this is a participle, what might be the clues that point us that way? Well, we'll see a verb stem, and then look for the voice indicator following the verb stem, either nun tau or some form of the S feminine voice indicator, or the men of the middle passive, and then a noun ending following that voice indicator. What tense is it? Well, if it's aorist tense, we're going to see some sort of sa combination, the sigma tense marker with an alpha connecting vowel. And if it's second aorist, we're going to see the second aorist stem. So as soon as you see ape, epsilon iota p, we recognize, this is a second aorist form from Lego. If it's present, on the other hand, you're going to have no sa, no sigma tense marker or alpha connecting vowel, and we're going to be using the present stem. What about voice? Well, if we have men, then it's going to be middle, or if it's present, it could also be passive. If it's active, we're going to see either nun tau or some version of that S feminine active voice marker. What declension should we look for in the endings? If it's an active participle, think 3, 1, 3. Third declension in the masculine, first declension in the feminine, third declension in the neuter. If it's middle or passive, think 2, 1, 2. Still first declension in the feminine, but now second declension in the masculine and neuter. Remember too your irregular active forms. Here usually there's no voice indicator because the voice indicator and ending together have just been mashed up and become irregular. These appear in the masculine nominative singular with as in the first aorist and on in both the second aorist and the present. In the neuter nominative singular, we have just the new. This is the case both for aorist and present. And in the masculine and neuter dative plural, we have either asi in the first aorist or usi in the second aorist and the present. Present substantive participles work very much like aorist substantive participles. So ha erchomenos would be the man who is going. Notice that, again, we have the present aspect. So instead of the man who goes, this is the man who is going, with a continual sense. Or ha erchomenos could be the man who is beginning to go. He luusa is similarly the woman who usually releases, or the woman who is releasing. And ta legomenon is the thing that was often said, or the thing that is being said. Present adverbial participles generally connect to the main verb in the same ways that aorist adverbial participles did. So we can have a causal participle, in which case the participle erchomenos would be translated something like because he is going. Or it can be concessive, in which case luusa might be although she usually released. Or if it were a purpose participle, legomenon might be translated so that it was often said, etc. We could see similar examples with the other adverbial senses with aorist participles. The one unique sense for a present adverbial participle is when it's used temporally. If you remember, we saw that with aorist temporal participles, the action of the participle happens before the action of the main verb. With present participles, if the connection to the main verb is temporal, the main verb action is happening at the same time as the participial action. So in these cases, we often use the helper words while or when to translate the participle. If I want to translate erchomenos te pole parusomai es te agora, I might translate this, while I am coming to the town, I will go into the market. In this case, the main verb is future, I will go, and so the time of the participle erchomenos will also be future. While I am coming, which is how we would express the accompanying action in the future in English, while I am coming to the town, I will go into the market. But if we had a past tense, and say an aorist verb as the main verb, then erchomenos would still be taking place at the same time as the main verb, just in the past. Here's another example. Misthon ergatein, Simon tinaxulon egorasan. While he was hiring a worker, misthon is while he was hiring. And why do we say was? Why is it in the past tense? Because the main verb, egorasen, is an aorist past tense. So the main action is buying. Simon tinaxulon egorasen. Simon bought some wood. And then the participial clause describes action that took place at the same time. When did Simon buy some wood? While he was hiring a worker. Misthon ergatein. Before we leave present participles, we should say something about the present participles of eimi, I am. Now, we don't have aorist participles of eimi, basically because the aorist aspect doesn't really make sense with the verb of being. The idea of being is inherently an ongoing process. So we only have present participles of eimi, and these are actually really, really easy to remember, because the participles of eimi are simply the voice indicator, connecting vowel, and case ending that you would put on the end of normal present participles. So on the end of masculine nominative singular participles, you usually put own. And the present participle of eimi in the masculine nominative singular is just own. The genitive masculine singular is ontos. The dative masculine singular is onti, and so on. In fact, there are no new forms, no new endings to remember at all with these present participles of eimi. You simply take all of the stuff that you would normally put on the end after the verb stem for a regular present participle, take away the verb stem, and what's left at the end, that is your present participle of eimi. This is the case with the plural participles of eimi as well as the singular participles. In the masculine and neuter, you just have the ont voice indicator, and then add on to that your regular connecting vowel and ending. So the nominative masculine singular is ontes, and the neuter nominative singular is onta, etc. Similarly, in the feminine plural, you just take the voice indicator us and add on to that your regular first declension feminine plural endings, usai, uson, usais, etc. The only thing to watch here is exactly the same thing you have to keep in mind with any other present participles. In the dative plural, masculine and neuter, the ont tense indicator, voice indicator changes to u because the sigma doesn't really play nicely with the nun tau, and so instead of ontsi, we have usi in the masculine and neuter dative plural. But that is the same thing that happens with any present participles in the dative plural. And so, again, none of this is new forms to remember. You can learn more about present participles in Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek and in Wallace's Basics of New Testament Syntax.